Part 1. The old diner sat beside the highway like a forgotten memory, its neon sign flickering against the cold evening sky. Rain tapped softly against the windows, and inside, beneath dim yellow lights, a man named Daniel Parker stared at an untouched plate of food and wondered how a life could become so quiet. He had come there to eat alone, the way he had done for months, carrying grief like a second shadow. But before that night ended, a mother's trembling voice and a hungry child would break open a heart he thought had already closed forever. If you believe in kindness, compassion, and second chances, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that may need hope today. Daniel was 58 years old, though sorrow had added extra years to his face. His shoulders were slightly bent, his hands rough from decades of work, and his eyes carried the heavy stillness of someone who had learned not to expect much from life anymore. He worked as a maintenance supervisor at a nearby factory, a job he kept mostly because routine felt safer than change. Every evening followed the same pattern. He left work, drove past neighborhoods filled with warm lights and laughter, and stopped at Miller's Diner before returning to the silent house, where no one waited. That house had once been full of life. Years earlier, Daniel's wife, Rebecca, had filled every room with warmth. She loved growing flowers along the porch and baking bread on weekends. Their son, Ellie, had inherited her laughter and Daniel's stubborn determination. For many years, Daniel believed he possessed everything a man could ever ask for. Then life shifted without warning. Rebecca became sick. The illness arrived quietly, disguised as exhaustion and headaches, until hospital visits replaced family dinners and hope began shrinking beneath medical reports. Daniel fought alongside her with desperate determination, working overtime to pay bills, sleeping in waiting rooms, pretending to be stronger than he felt. But disease does not negotiate with love. Rebecca passed away during a cold November morning, and something inside Daniel collapsed beside her. Losing her had been devastating, but the tragedy that followed nearly destroyed him. Eli, already struggling with grief, drifted into anger and distance. Daniel and his son fought often. Daniel believed discipline would protect him from pain. Eli only heard criticism. Their conversations became arguments, and arguments became silence. One stormy night, after harsh words neither of them could take back, Eli left home. The next morning, Daniel received a phone call that shattered whatever remained of his world. There had been an accident. Eli never returned. For years afterward, Daniel replayed that final argument in his mind. He remembered the frustration in his own voice, the wounded expression on his son's face, and the unbearable realization that love left unspoken can become regret that lasts a lifetime. That was why he hated evenings. Night gave memory too much room to breathe. Miller's Diner became his refuge because strangers rarely asked questions. The waitress, Martha, knew him well enough not to force conversation. She simply served black coffee and whatever special was available, offering quiet kindness without demanding explanations. That evening, the rain had started early. The diner was nearly empty, except for a truck driver reading a newspaper and an elderly couple sharing pie near the window. Daniel sat in his usual booth, listening to the low hum of refrigerators and distant thunder. He ordered meatloaf, but barely touched it. His mind wandered toward home, toward the framed photographs gathering dust on the mantel, toward the silence waiting for him. Then the bell above the diner door rang. A woman stepped inside holding the hand of a small boy. Daniel noticed them only briefly at first, but something about their appearance caught his attention. The woman looked exhausted. Her coat was damp from rain and slightly too thin for the weather. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes, and she carried herself with the careful tension of someone trying not to fall apart. The boy beside her looked around 7 years old. His sneakers were worn, his cheeks pale, and he clutched a faded toy car missing one wheel. They hesitated near the entrance. The woman looked around the diner with visible uncertainty. Daniel returned his gaze to his plate, assuming they would sit elsewhere. But a few moments later, he overheard a quiet exchange near the counter. Martha's apologetic voice carried softly through the room. The woman had little money. Daniel tried not to listen, but fragments reached him anyway. The boy was hungry. They had been traveling. She asked whether one meal could be shared between them. Daniel felt something uncomfortable tighten inside him. He knew hardship existed. He saw homeless men near the bus station and families struggling with rent. But grief sometimes narrows compassion. When a person spends too long surviving emotional pain, they begin protecting themselves from other people's suffering. He told himself not to get involved. It was none of his business. Then he heard the child speak. His voice was small, almost embarrassed. And suddenly, Daniel remembered Eli at that age, sitting at kitchen counters swinging his legs while asking endless questions about airplanes and baseball. Daniel stared harder at his untouched meal. He felt memory and guilt moving inside him like restless ghosts. The woman noticed the empty booth across from Daniel and approached cautiously. Her expression carried dignity despite obvious desperation. She apologized for disturbing him and explained that the diner was crowded near the warmer seats. Then she said words Daniel would remember forever. Her son was hungry. Could they stay a while? For several seconds, Daniel said nothing. The request was simple, yet it unsettled him more than he expected. Sharing space meant acknowledging their struggle. It meant stepping outside the emotional walls he had built carefully over the years. His first instinct was retreat. But when he looked at the boy, he saw exhaustion rather than mischief, fear rather than entitlement. Daniel nodded. The mother thanked him quietly and sat opposite him while the boy settled beside her. Rain continued falling outside. An awkward silence followed. The woman introduced herself as Lena. Her son's name was Noah. She explained they had arrived from another town after leaving an unsafe living situation. She spoke carefully, offering details without inviting pity. She had been searching for work and temporary shelter, but had encountered more closed doors than opportunities. Daniel listened while pretending not to care too deeply. Noah kept glancing toward Daniel's plate. That glance broke him. Without making a dramatic gesture, Daniel pushed the plate toward the boy and told him he could have it. Lena protested immediately, embarrassed and grateful at once, but Daniel insisted. Noah hesitated before taking a bite. The hunger in that child's face carried no performance. He ate carefully, trying not to seem desperate, and Daniel felt shame burn through him for every moment he had considered looking away. Martha understood the situation almost instantly. Without announcing charity, she brought additional bread and soup to the table. Something changed in the atmosphere. The diner no longer felt merely like a place to escape loneliness. For the first time in years, Daniel found himself participating in conversation. Noah talked about toy cars and storms, and his dream of seeing the ocean someday. Lena spoke about working as a caregiver before losing housing after escaping an abusive relationship. Her voice remained calm, but exhaustion revealed itself between sentences. Daniel noticed how fiercely protective she seemed. Even while hungry herself, she kept encouraging Noah to eat more. He recognized that kind of love. Rebecca had carried the same instinct. As the evening stretched on, Daniel learned they had nowhere certain to stay that night. Local shelters were full. A motel required money Lena did not possess. The realization unsettled him. Outside, rain grew heavier. Daniel told himself again not to interfere. He had already bought dinner. That was enough. Yet while Lena thanked him and prepared to leave, Noah accidentally dropped his broken toy car onto the floor. Daniel bent to pick it up. The car's missing wheel reminded him of something. Years ago, Eli had owned a similar toy. Daniel still kept it inside a drawer at home. The memory hit with startling force. He imagined this child sleeping in cold uncertainty while he returned to an empty house containing unused bedrooms and memories nobody visited. And suddenly, the loneliness he guarded so fiercely felt less like protection and more like prison. Daniel surprised himself. He offered them shelter for the night. Lena froze. Fear crossed her face first, followed by cautious disbelief. She had learned not to trust easily, and Daniel respected that hesitation. He explained gently that his home was nearby, that there were separate rooms, and that she could refuse without offense. The silence felt endless. Finally, after looking toward Noah and then toward the storm outside, Lena accepted. The drive home passed quietly. Daniel worried. He had made a reckless decision. What if he regretted it? What if strangers complicated his already fragile life? But when they entered his house, something unexpected happened. Noah looked around with wonder rather than suspicion. The home was modest but clean, preserved like a museum of abandoned happiness. Lena thanked him repeatedly, while Daniel prepared spare blankets. Then, Noah noticed the photographs. He asked who the smiling woman and teenage boy were. Daniel rarely spoke about them. Usually, he avoided the subject, yet that night, perhaps because grief had already been stirred open, he answered honestly. He told Noah about Rebecca. He told him about Eli. And for the first time in years, he spoke his son's name without immediately turning away from the pain attached to it. Noah listened with innocent seriousness. Then, he said something simple that struck Daniel harder than any therapy session or sympathetic advice ever had. He said, Eli must have loved him very much. Daniel nearly cried. Because, mighty, beneath regret and guilt, beneath years of self-punishment, he had almost forgotten that possibility. That night, he lay awake long after his guests had fallen asleep. The house sounded different, not louder, just alive. Morning arrived with pale sunlight spilling across the kitchen. Daniel woke to unfamiliar sounds: cabinet doors, soft footsteps, quiet laughter. Lena was making coffee while Noah sat at the table, drawing roads and cars on scrap paper. The sight affected Daniel more than he expected. For years he had believed healing required forgetting pain or overcoming it through strength alone. But perhaps healing sometimes arrived disguised as responsibility, compassion, and unexpected company. He helped Lena search for local employment over breakfast. By afternoon, through factory contacts and Martha's recommendations, possibilities emerged. A nearby assisted living center needed help. Days became a week. A week became longer. Daniel never intended permanent change. Yet life often ignores human plans. Lena found work. Noah enrolled temporarily at a nearby school. And Daniel discovered that caring about others did not erase grief, but it softened its sharpest edges. One evening, while cleaning his garage, Daniel found Ellie's old toy car. He repaired its wheel carefully and handed it to Noah. The boy's joy filled the room, but Daniel's real gift was invisible. He had finally forgiven himself enough to share memory without drowning in it. Before the ending, a special request for everyone watching. Please comment, kindness still lives. If you believe one act of compassion can change someone's life. Months later, Daniel returned to Miller's diner. This time, he did not sit alone. Lena and Noah joined him in the same booth where everything had begun. Rain tapped softly against the windows again, almost as if the world remembered. Daniel looked around the diner and realized how close he had come to remaining trapped inside his sorrow forever. He had entered that place expecting another silent meal and another empty evening. Instead, a mother's courage and a hungry child had reminded him that broken hearts still have room to love. The grief of losing Rebecca and Eli never disappeared. Love that deep never truly leaves. But grief no longer owned him, because sometimes healing does not arrive through grand miracles. Sometimes it enters quietly, carrying tired eyes, worn shoes, and a trembling request to stay a while. And the lonely man who thought he would eat alone discovered that kindness, when welcomed, can become family. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to support more emotional stories that remind us of humanity, hope, and second chances. Your engagement truly matters and helps these messages reach people who may be struggling in silence. And somewhere beyond memory and regret, Daniel believed Rebecca and Eli would have smiled at the man he finally became.